It was an ordinary day, or at least it seemed like one. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the quiet suburban neighborhood was peaceful. But all of that changed in a heartbeat. A mother, going about her daily routine, suddenly found herself thrust into an unimaginable nightmare. Her daughter, who had been in a wheelchair due to a disability, was sitting on their front porch when a horrifying event unfolded. Out of nowhere, a law enforcement officer appeared and, without warning, fired a shot. The bullet struck the innocent child in the face, causing a wave of devastation and pain. The mother rushed to her daughter's side, her heart pounding in her chest, as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. How could this have occurred? Why was her child, who was already vulnerable, the victim of such a brutal act? In the chaos that followed, the police officer involved claimed that it was an accident, a tragic mistake. But to the mother, there was no justification for what had just happened. The pain, confusion, and anger flooded her mind. It was clear that this was no ordinary accident. This was a horrific violation of trust, one that could never be undone. This chapter sets the stage for a heart-wrenching journey filled with questions, emotions, and the pursuit of justice. As the mother struggles to process what has happened, she begins to realize that this isn't just a matter of an accident, it is something far deeper. The first few hours after the shooting were a blur of frantic action. Emergency responders arrived on the scene, their sirens wailing as they rushed the injured girl to the hospital. The mother, still in shock, followed behind in the ambulance, unable to process the full extent of the situation. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to assess the damage. The injury was severe, and the bullet had caused significant trauma to the child's face. The mother could only watch helplessly as medical staff did everything they could to save her daughter's life. The fear and uncertainty that gripped her were overwhelming. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the police officer's claim of an accident was already circulating. It seemed to be the officer's only defense, and the community began to grapple with the narrative that was being pushed. But the mother wasn't ready to accept that. To her, the shooting was far from an accident. It was an act of reckless behavior and gross negligence. This chapter explores the initial shock and confusion that the mother experiences as she watches her daughter fight for her life. It also delves into the conflicting stories being told by the police and the community's response to the incident. As the days passed, the mother's grief transformed into something more powerful, a burning desire for justice. She couldn't simply accept the officer's word that it had been an accident. The idea that a law enforcement officer could fire a weapon at her disabled daughter and then claim it was a mistake seemed too outrageous to overlook. Determined to uncover the truth, the mother began to dig deeper into the circumstances surrounding the shooting. She sought out witnesses, spoke to neighbors, and even began gathering her own evidence to challenge the narrative being presented. Every conversation with the police or hospital staff only fueled her frustration as she felt the weight of bureaucracy and the legal system working against her. But she wasn't alone in her fight. Support from friends, family, and even strangers poured in. The community rallied behind her, demanding answers and justice for the disabled child who had been wrongfully targeted. The public outcry only grew louder, and the mother's resolve became stronger. She wasn't going to let this tragedy slip under the rug as another accident. This chapter focuses on the mother's transformation from grief-stricken victim to determined advocate. It highlights her efforts to seek justice for her daughter and challenge the official narrative. As the investigation into the incident continued, the mother began to focus on the police officer's actions leading up to the shooting. According to the initial reports, the officer had been responding to an alleged situation in the neighborhood, but there were conflicting accounts of how the situation unfolded. The officer's claim that the shooting was an accident didn't seem to match up with the evidence. Witnesses reported hearing the officer yell before firing, suggesting that this wasn't a spontaneous reaction to a perceived threat. Furthermore, the officer's behavior in the moments before the shooting seemed to lack proper training and protocol. The mother, with the help of her legal team, started to analyze the police officer's history, looking for any patterns of misconduct or excessive use of force. Was this a case of poor judgment, Or was there something more sinister at play? The investigation into the officer's background became a crucial part of the battle for justice. This chapter delves into the police officer's actions leading up to the shooting and examines the inconsistencies in the official narrative. It raises questions about accountability, law enforcement training, and the potential for misconduct. As the details of the shooting spread, the media quickly picked up the story. Headlines across the country began to cover the incident, bringing it to the forefront of national news. The mother's fight for justice became a symbol of resistance against police brutality and the systemic issues that plague law enforcement. But with the media attention came scrutiny. The police department and the officer involved tried to maintain their stance that it was an accident, and their allies in the media echoed the same message. They claimed that the officer was simply doing her job and that the shooting was a tragic mistake. On the other hand, the mother's supporters saw the story as one of an unjustified attack on an innocent child, highlighting the vulnerability of disabled people in society. Social media platforms exploded with outrage, and public opinion became increasingly divided. This chapter examines the role of the media in shaping public perception of the incident. It explores the power of the media to influence the narrative and how public opinion shifted as more details about the case emerged. As the months passed, the case entered the legal phase. The mother, now fully immersed in the fight for justice, faced a complicated legal process. The officer's defense lawyer argued that the shooting was indeed an accident, and they would stop at nothing to prove it. But the mother's legal team had different plans. They worked tirelessly to build a case that would challenge the notion of an accident. They called for expert testimonies, gathered more witness statements, and reviewed every bit of evidence to prove that the officer's actions were not only negligent, but possibly intentional. The courtroom became the stage for a fierce battle. The mother, though still grieving, stood firm in her determination to see the officer held accountable. The legal system, however, was not as straightforward. There were setbacks, delays, and moments of doubt that made the journey even more difficult. But the mother's resolve never wavered. This chapter focuses on the legal challenges the mother faced as she fought for justice in the courtroom. It explores the intricacies of the legal process and the emotional toll it took on her as the case dragged on. As the case progressed, the public continued to play a significant role in the fight for justice. Protests were held in various cities demanding justice for the injured child and accountability for the police officer. People from all walks of life, activists, parents, disabled individuals, joined the cause, creating a movement that resonated across the country. The public's outcry was impossible to ignore. Political leaders, celebrities, and civil rights organizations began to take a stand. The story of the disabled girl shot in the face by a police officer had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. The mother knew that the power of the people was her greatest ally. The continued pressure from the public kept the case in the public eye and ensured that the fight for justice remained alive. This chapter highlights the crucial role that public support played in the case. It examines the power of collective action and how the public's involvement influenced the outcome of the case. The case eventually reached its final stages. After months of legal battles, public protests, and media scrutiny, the courtroom drama came to an end. The judge delivered the final verdict, and the officer was held accountable for her actions. It wasn't the outcome the mother had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. The mother, though deeply scarred by the events, felt a sense of relief. She had fought for justice, not only for her daughter, but for all those who had been wronged by the system. The verdict sent a message that even law enforcement officers must be held accountable for their actions. However, the road ahead was not over. The mother knew that the struggle for justice was ongoing, that there were still countless others who had suffered in silence. She vowed to continue her fight, ensuring that her daughter's story would never be forgotten. This final chapter reflects on the outcome of the case and the mother's journey toward healing. It looks ahead to the future where the fight for justice continues for those who have been wronged by the system.